Welcome to After the Deluge. I'm Justin Cox, and my guests today are Brian Howe and Evan Bailey. Say hello.
Hey, Justin.
Hi there.
Awesome. Good to have you both on. So this one is going to be the three of us talking about Cassadaga. And so we're going to start with Brian in just a second. But how I came to this record, I'll have more to say about this in a minute. But this was the first one that I was sort of like, I knew the release date that was sitting there. And for like the 3, 4, 5 months leading up to it, I was sort of like hearing the singles or whatever and just kind of like anticipating a thing I would go to the record store and buy the day it came out. And I did that. I was downloading files prior to that. I was being given burned CDs. I was out of the country when I'm Wide Awake It's Morning came out. So I was getting this like really into this music over a period of time. This was the first time I was like, go buy this thing the day it came out. And I'll leave that there for now. And Brian, tell me about you. When was your introduction to Bright Eyes and then this record specifically?
Sure. I heard you ask Ian Cohen this question listening to the podcast, and I was trying to think about how I would answer it because I really don't remember how Bright Eyes came into my life. By the time Cassadaga came out, which I always want to call Cassadaga because that's kind of how it's spelled. But on the record, on one of the samples, they say Cassadaga. So, and that really, it sounds better. But still, I was looking at it today and I was like, wait, is Cassadaga?
I hesitate every single time I type that word.
Yeah, right. So by the time Cassadaga came along, I guess I'm what you would call like a former huge fan who was still trying to like cling to that glory a bit. So I'd been into Bright Eyes ever since the early stuff and Fevers and Mirrors. I'm one of those Fevers and Mirrors is the apotheosis of Bright Eyes people. And it's all kind of downhill from there. Although I am always surprised how good Lifted is when I go back and actually listen to it as an adult outside of those kind of concerns of the time. So I wouldn't have gotten into it on the internet. That wasn't quite the thing yet. I didn't really get into file sharing in a big way until I started writing for Pitchfork, and that was a few years after Fevers and Mirrors. I was probably like 19. I had dropped out of college at East Carolina University, where I was studying visual art, and I was getting really into writing. And in particular, I was getting really into the Chapel Hill music scene, which I was writing about for zines and for an alt weekly not long after that. Cool. So at that time, music was just kind of like the entire fabric of my life. I may have just seen it and thought the mirrored cover looked really cool and bought it on the strength of that. But I know I became like hugely into it, like had so much dark cathexis with that album. Like that album, Bright Eyes and I are pretty much the exact same age. So I was also in that transition from my late teens to early 20s at that time. As a white man in suburban America right before the internet. It really just spoke to all of my concerns at that time and probably my monumental self-obsession. I was a real like mega fan in a way that was like kind of core to my identity in some ways at that time. So you can probably already see the dominoes waiting to fall there when we both got a little older and I changed and he changed and his music changed and things like that. So Lifted, I was definitely still strong enough on my Bright Eyes fandom, and that album is just good enough that I rode for Lifted at the time, for sure. And it is a good record. There was some part of me that was, I think, disappointed though, because it wasn't like he wasn't in a closet with like withdrawal sweats. You couldn't hear like the sweat dripping, his flop sweat dripping onto the guitar strings and stuff like that.
On Fevers and Mirrors, you're really feeling the tremble in those feelings and hearing the rooms and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, so I missed that a bit on Lifted, but I appreciated that he was having a big moment and that it was, progression and all of that. So me and Lifted were pretty much okay. And when I listen to it now, I'm always like, this is better than I gave it credit for at the time, better than I could see through my, expectations. I thought Wide Awake was a pretty intolerable album, and I listened to it again today and I still think it's a pretty intolerable album. But I had Digital Ash and a Digital Urn to get me through that and still be a Bright Eyes fan. A record I don't really remember at all now, but at the time I was like, oh yeah, this is like my Bright Eyes record. At that point in my life, I was kind of leaving my arch indie lord phase and entering the more poptimist hedonistic phase, and wanted to go dancing, and Digital Urn had a little bit of that on it. So by the time Cassadaga comes along, my expectations are kind of low, but I'm still kind of invested. I still kind of want some of that old Bright Eyes magic and think I might be able to get it. But really, when I look back at that record, it struck me, it felt like the end of something, kind of the end of an arc, probably for him and for me. And that thing was probably just like our 20s. Of course, he was dealing with other things. I think maybe the fallout from all the new Dylan things, which I did some reading up on today, which was pretty interesting. Maybe we can talk about that later.
Yeah.
I came to Cassadaga with, all that baggage, got assigned the Pitchfork review. And I don't know, maybe we should save the Pitchfork review talk for later, and I'll give Evan a crack at this before I go on any longer. But you can read the review and see I wasn't a big fan of Cassadaga. Listening to it now, it kind of grew on me a little bit today. It's not a great record. It's a pretty good record. There's some cringe moments on it. But then I also think about how anytime you make yourself sit down and listen to music, most of the time it sounds pretty good. Like it's music. Like it doesn't generally sound that bad. The question is whether you are called back to listen to it again. And Cassadaga was certainly an album that I kind of forgot after it came out and have hardly ever gone back to it.
As we kick over to Evan, like I think I remember that those first plays of it, like certain moments, like grabbing me very hard, like a really loving and still really loving a certain set of songs. But then also, songs were like, man, I could appreciate what was being done and the like care that was taken to make it. I mean, there's a lot of, it feels like a piece, they do accomplish that, but that thing you just described about being pulled and called back to the songs, I'd say a little more than half of them, I'm like, don't just automatically and viscerally do that. But it's even what it's like this thing, like, man, I respect what you are more than I just like you kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah.
All right, Evan, Bright Eyes and Cassadaga specifically. And I want to say real quick, like what I just described, not about the part where the songs call you back, but the thing feeling like a cohesive, well thought out thing. That's a thing that I would say about both of Evan's bands that I've listened to. You guys, it's like, this is not just tossed on and recorded. This is very thought out and placed together, and it's something about that could be just me projecting that onto why we're talking about Cassadaga right now, but I've done that in my head, just so you know. So go ahead, Evan.
Evan, real quick, I deliberately did not listen to your music before this podcast because I didn't want it to get mashed up with Bright Eyes in my head, but I look forward to listening to it after we're done.
Cool. Sounds good. I think we kind of have an agreement here about this being the arc of Bright Eyes, but I love it personally. And I think the way that I came into it is, so when I was a kid, I grew up in an evangelical Christian household, and in high school I was into mostly punk rock, especially like skate punk, like Lagwagon. And then after 9/11, I joined the army. And so I was in the army, and actually I heard a little bit of Lifted, but the first I think the first thing I really got into was a Wide Awake, because I'm sort of basic in that way, and I think that's when a lot of kind of like indie folk was happening at the time, and that was kind of the place I was going after I was into punk rock. So when I kind of ended the punk rock phase and I was in the army, I was kind of like, I was doing a lot of file sharing, a lot of LimeWire. So that's where I got a lot of the Bright Eyes exposure, is just like illegally downloading albums and just pouring through records. And I think Cassadaga is the first Bright Eyes record that I purchased. I bought it on vinyl. And I think I had like maybe 2 Sufjan records. This was maybe like the 4th or 5th vinyl that I bought. Before then, I just had CDs. So it's kind of like an important record. And after I got out of the army, I was kind of like losing a lot of the Christianity that was in my life. I was kind of like in this journey of like losing faith. And I think there's some places on this record that kind of like, in hindsight, the kind of the obsession with the apocalypse. There's a thread there. There's a thread about just like trying to find some sense of spirituality that makes sense.
Yep.
That's not like a traditional spirituality. There's like a call to kind of like nature that's happening in this, and I think I kind of responded to. Now the older Bright Eyes records, I think, stand up better a little for me. but I still have like a strong affinity for this. I think one of the reasons is because I kind of lean toward recordings that are more clean. A lot of the cool things I like about the more rough Bright Eyes recordings, those elements can kind of be found on this record too, but they're presented in this very like, pristine kind of way, which I think it kind of speaks to me still. And I do agree there's some songs that I don't I'm not going to put on repeat or anything, but I think there's some strong songs here. There's strong material here, and I also think that there's a lot of callbacks to their previous records, kind of represent ideas in a more clean way, and I think I kind of still respond to it. So
I think pristine is a good word for it. It all feels like it's made in the same room by the same people with this like collection of instruments and everything. Whereas like when you describe lifted for me, like it thrives on just purely being whatever it is, but like it's a fucking mess in terms of it's not consistent at all in what it sounds like. It's everywhere, It doesn't feel that way, but the part where it hangs me up, and this was my experience with the record, having bought it. I think like I did buy the CD, I have it here, and so I remember I went there with the girl that I dated right previously to getting married. Just a weird, vivid memory because that was like done within days of that. But until like I'm at this record store, I get this CD, this little spectral decoder, and like it's like creating an experience for you. And then as I listened to it over the following like weeks and months, it's like I was trying to like get myself to love all of it. Like I'd get my 4 or 5 songs, but then you're just like, why do I keep skipping No One Would Riot for Less? Like, just do it. This thing is a full package. Just keep going. But like those songs, as much as they felt impressive to me, they kind of felt impressive in a way that was like, I'm sitting in a chair like 6 rows back and watching the Nutcracker Suite or something, and like hearing little flutters of violins and things. There's like, I get that that's a choice, and I get that might be being executed well. It's not what I'm here for, But all the respect, you do what you do. But so Brian, you get assigned that Pitchfork review. Is that a process of claiming that you want to write this and then they go about it, or a pure assignment based thing? How do you end up with that one? And just kind of more broadly, how does that work?
Sure. Well, real quick, I wanted to say I felt a little bad having been slagging off these records that Evan likes so much, but I do think that Evan probably has a much clearer perspective on these records than I do. I'm able to bring a lot more impartiality to them now at age 43 than I was in, my 20s when they were coming out. But because of the situation I described with how like closely associated I was with those early records, it's still really hard for me to kind of hear them for what they are and to disentangle them from myself, both from my fond memories about them and from the things that I hate about myself now that, I saw in myself then. So I think Evan probably brings a much clearer perspective, having come to it at maybe a slightly later time in life and come to the cleaner, records first. And also, I like experimental music, so I like dark, cramped, scribbly sounds like he had on those early records, maybe more than some of the orchestrations. So the review. I have no idea how I got assigned that review because it works all kinds of ways. Sometimes you pitch records and you get assigned those. Sometimes the editor will just ask so-and-so, to review this record. I've written about Bright Eyes a few times, but probably less than you would think. I think editors would like shy away from giving me Bright Eyes stuff sometimes because I seemed a little too like close to it maybe. And I think they were probably right about that. I think I wrote this review. I wrote a blurb about him for some Pitchfork list. I wrote about Thieves and Mirrors. Maybe it was our 90s list before the current 90s list, something like that. So I haven't gotten to write about him that much. So I'm sure I was pitching, all those records up till this one. And maybe they finally just decided to give me this one. Maybe nobody else cared about it that much or something. Or maybe they decided it was time I had my crack. I don't know. At any rate, so that was your question, is how I came to have that review. And yeah.
And then, so as you sit down, you're listening to this record, you're thinking about it, you're processing it and going about the process of writing. You kind of lead with this Dave Eggers comparison, which was a fascinating, interesting one to read. And so that's the like heartbreaking work of staggering genius with like the 150 page long preface that, I mean, it was kind of stunning to me how much it felt like Bright Eyes in book form at that period, you know, everything down to like the 6 minutes of talking about random shit before the music starts. Like, I don't know. I don't even really have a question there, except that I really enjoyed that in the interview and been thinking about it ever since.
That was kind of fun to go back and read, Justin. You know, I wish I could say I had any memory of writing that review or what I was thinking or feeling. I've written like 560 something Pitchfork reviews. That one was in 2007, so there's a lot of water under the bridge.
That's just stunning to me that you've written that many of them. And I was actually,
Me too.
I was browsing through, landing on pages the way I do sometimes when I was listening to some music the other day. I was actually thinking about some like a future thing I might do on this podcast, and I landed on the page for the Microphones, the Microphones follow-up album to The Glow Part 2, Blood. And as I was like reading about it, you wrote it. I was like, oh, we're talking on Sunday. That's like, this is so funny to me. And
if you would ask me, Brian, have you ever written about the Microphones? I would have said no. I have no memory. I have no memory whatsoever of writing about that. So that's funny. So, but anyway, I always suck in my teeth a little bit before I go to look at one of my reviews in the archive. I'm a big repudiator personally. Anything I'd done more than like 6 months to a year ago, I probably have repudiated it and do not like it. But sometimes I go back into the archive and I find something like, oh, you did okay on that one, little guy. I don't necessarily love the writing style in this one, but I do think that point was kind of interesting. And like I came back to it as a reader, having forgotten that I had written it, and I was like, yeah, I think that's interesting. I think that kind of holds up. So here were these two people, one an author, one a musician. The main contrast, of course, is that Eggers is this like rampant like enthusiast, this like kind of extrovert seeming personality and very like up in your face with your shirt collar, you know, like yelling into your face kind of guy. And then Bright Eyes is, you know, the opposite extreme, like the guy who's like, you know, cringing in the closet or something, you know, hiding from everybody. But you know, here are these two works of like monumental self-obsession, I guess you would have to call it, with these kind of metatextual touches, whether it's, you know, obviously all the Eggers stuff, Bright Eyes with his like fake interview on Fevers and Mirrors, stuff like that. And they had both been so like problematic, but good in that, in that self-obsessed mode, because they were writing something real and something they like really knew. I haven't read a heartbreaking work of staggering genius in many, many, many years. I'm sure I would find it hard to swallow now, but it made a big impression on me at the time. Yeah. And then, of course, Eggers, after that book, turned to writing these much more political novels, which seemed like farcical to me. I mean, they were absurd books. That same lens of like self-obsession that magnified the self so much and had that lacerating quality when you turned it like outward onto the world, it just didn't work. It didn't work, or it didn't work the same way. And everything that was corny about it was just like magnified and amplified times like 100. Yeah.
It's so true and so real. But I just think I do think it's important to also like take ourselves and put ourselves back. I've really enjoyed that about this podcast, but just like drop ourselves squarely into 2003 through 2005 and how it felt, you know. I think it comes from a place of just like, I can't just sing about myself in my quaver. I can't, like, it feels like I got to do right. Like, so, but I don't disagree with what you're saying. I agree that it can come off that way, but also I bet I know I had conversations where I sounded that way out of pure, just like,
yes,
what are we doing if we're not talking about this shit right now? You know? Right.
The impulse was good. The execution was bad and full of like blind spots. I mean, there's some things on this record lyrically. I mean, some of it's just cheesy. Like, why are you like Phil Ox? Why are you singing like it's like I ain't marching anymore or something? Like, who are you? Who are you supposed to be? Like, you used to sing about like a girl who was like combing her hair in the mirror before school, and it was something you saw and described, and that was great. What the hell are you even singing about on this album, Cassadaga? A lot of the time, I try and listen to the lyrics. I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But some of the stuff even struck me as problematic then in 2007. And that's saying something because I was fucking oblivious in 2007. But I knew there was something like cringe and bad and not right about a soul singer in a session band and the kind of persona and the positionality he had on that even then.
See the soul singer in the session band, shredded to ribbons beneath a microphone stand, felt the quickness darkness of pity, like a flash in a pan for the soul singer in the session band.
I mean, looking back at my review, I was kind of surprised about how hard I was on it, and I kind of pursued this point about the lyrics to a point that was kind of single-minded and simple-minded, to a point that was even unfair. But I don't think I was wrong about the problems with these lyrics in any way. But also, I think I was still feeling kind of like betrayed by Bright Eyes then, and working that out, which is to say I was feeling betrayed by myself for growing up and for the illusions and dreams of my 20s to start to fracture and the whole world to open out beyond that. So
it's impossible to overstate like if you find an artist at a certain time in your life and they mean a certain thing, everything that comes later is going to be processed through that. And I think a super personal thing like Bright Eyes is going to be extra of that. So like Evan has some version that, and I have my own version that is picking up bits and pieces in the like between Lifted and I'm Wide Awake, so that then when you get Cassadaga, you're not even in a position to be betrayed or let down so significantly in any way. It's like,
that's right.
Just the next record, up to this point, this one is weird. It's not divisive, but it's like some people, it is their favorite Bright Eyes record. Like that exists. And I think that's like a thing that's grown in a way. And some people I don't think that like Lifted, Fevers and Mirrors, I'm Wide Awake, It's Morning is like a different beast. I'm Wide Awake and Digital Ash. Like this one could be anywhere on someone's list of like good or bad for Bright Eyes in a way that it's very, very,
right.
I wanted to say to Brian two things. I think that like me now, obviously you said like you're kind of apologizing for your perspective, which the me now like has no concern over your perspective. Sure. and I think like no apologies required. And I also appreciate your perspective more now than I did when you wrote that review. And I can't disentangle myself from the person I was when I first heard the record either. So we're basically in the same exact situation, in that I was the person I was when I first heard it, and you were the person you were when you first heard it. And so that leads us into totally different places. But I think that not being able to remove yourself from the material is a commonality we have. So no apologies. Obviously, no apologies needed.
Thank you.
I don't feel personal. I don't feel a need to personally stand up for this material. But there is something past me does have a beef with you.
Okay.
You ruined the song Four Winds for me.
Me too. I know.
I grabbed the quote here. Four Winds with its squealing guitars and fiddles sounds like a honky-tonk version of Santa Claus is Coming to Town. And I was listening to this record pretty regularly. And there was a period in time where I would check Pitchfork, and I did read your review back when probably a few months after the record came out. And ever since then, I cannot get that out of my head. So
it's really flagrant. Yeah, it's really flagrant though. I mean, often you'll pick out a little similarity here and there, but I listened to it today and I was like, nope, that one part is fucking Santa Claus is Coming to Town, and one specific arrangement of Santa Claus is Coming to Town where it has that stop and then it starts again. Santa. It's that one with the violin. Like, it is bang on. And that's such a serious song, and it's such a weird melodic reference to come in there. So I'm sorry to have ruined that for you. I think Justin said that Ian did that to him. There was a song on Fevers and Mirrors that you can sing "No Woman, No Cry" over. Is that right, Justin?
Yeah. Something vague.
It wouldn't have hurt if it wasn't true.
I know. I think that I read that review around the time it was out too, because I remember the part in it about the conversation with the postmodern author for some reason. I think I remember remembering that because I was like, I don't actually understand the specifics of what we're talking about here, but it stood out to me for that specific reason. And so I read into it. The Santa Claus is Coming to Town one was that was ruined for me this week specifically, to the point that when I reread the interview like an hour or so ago before this, once I saw that sentence come up, I was like, just breeze through that. Don't get Santa Claus is Coming to Town back into your head. Like, and the intro of Four Winds is so long, playing out that kind of melody. It's just inviting you to think about it. So sorry for however many people that are going to get
Yes, I apologize to the listeners, but you know what? I didn't tell him to put 2 bars of Santa Claus is Coming to Town in his serious protest song. He did. Somebody had to say something. So
do I cut Santa Claus is Coming to Town into this podcast?
I think so. You got to find the right version though to sell it.
Santa Claus is coming to town. Santa Claus is coming to town.
Also, I worked in retail for about 10 years. So Santa Claus is Coming to Town, it has a particular grating impact on my ears.
Yes.
Yeah.
Understandable. Justin, you mentioned the part in The Soul Singer of the Session Band about the postmodern author. Yeah, that's just it was such a bizarre choice. He's talking about having a conversation about the power of myth with a postmodern author that didn't exist. And then it goes into the chorus, like the soul singer in the session band. Like, what are you talking about? How is that anything like the soul singer in the session band?
Yeah.
I had a lengthy discussion about the power of myth with a postmodern author who didn't exist in this fictitious world. All reality twists. I was a hopeless romantic. Now I'm just turning tricks. Just like that soul singer in the session band.
What you just said about like whatever he's doing and then bangs back to soul singer in a session band, like that thing, I feel like a convention that I find multiple times on this record that bothers me is like, all right, I got my little line, soul singer in a session band, if the brakeman turns my way. And it's like, do my little things to where I can come back to say that thing again in a way that I'm just like, I don't want to hear you say if the brakeman turns my way again.
Well, I think one key thing about this record is that underneath everything else that's going on, I think if it's one kind of record, it's a country record, and those are a lot of the kind of signifiers it's going for, and kind of its mythology. And so, and that he's trying to do that thing that great like pop country songwriters do, where you have a chorus, a little like just a bit of syntactical stuff in the chorus, and you can bend the verses around it in such a way that it changes the meaning of the chorus through syntax. Lots of great country songs do this. I think that's what he's trying to do, but he writes far too many words of far too much complexity for them to ever hook that way. So the whole system of it just kind of goes haywire, and he ends up making comparisons he probably doesn't even mean to make. Just so the chorus happens to say like at the beginning, so anything else in the verses is going to be like that, and it all just gets kind of like wedged in, whether it kind of makes sense or not.
And I could meet you any place if the brakeman turns my way. All this automatic.
There are about 5 songs on this record that I really, really love. One of them is Four Winds, quite honestly. I don't care, but it's being battle tested now as we head into Christmas season. But
Four Winds has a good chorus. The chorus of every like tons of songs from this have like a great like part on them. And he writes really good melodies. He makes good arrangements when they're really small and they're not like these big orchestrated like youth group kind of things. And I think he's a really good singer. I mean, I think people say like, oh, he can't really sing. I think he has an interesting voice. I like his singing a lot. I mean, Four Winds has a good chorus. The verses of the song of Brakeman are pretty good, especially that stepwise descending melody at the end of the verses of Brakeman. He's always really good at those.
First a mother bathes her child, then the other way around. The scales always find a way to level out. I try to pass for nothing, but my dreams gave me away. Mix of signals, bullet train.
They all have those moments, and then there'll be another part that kind of walls me off from them.
Cassadaga. Oh yeah, that's where you're going to find a center of energy, and they've got those in Arizona too. You know, I know that there's wonderful grounds that have vortexes that you might be interested in going to, and then go to Nevada, and then go to California, and then come south, and go back through Arizona, and go through Texas. You know what I'm saying? Getting rid of the old feelings, of the old ways of thinking. And, you know, it's kind of like when people do the tarot cards. Just because you get the death card doesn't mean death and dying. It means transformation. It means changing things around and starting something new. Because I was pulling in on a dog companion with you. Somehow I get the impression that you're almost a little afraid to start the trip. It doesn't have to be a straight line happy face, but make kind of a happy face, or make kind of a smile. Go up the East Coast, but it's going to be a circle. You know what I'm saying? It's going to be a choppy circle. Don't be afraid. You know, years and years and years ago, you know, you might just come across the river and the rocks and the mountains or whatever, and then when you get there, maybe you'll have the answer.
Clairaudience, the first song, that spoke to me in a way where, one, it's a callback to this like trope of doing the sampling thing, you know, like that I think is sort of like a through line, and up to that point, right? It's basically a through line of every Bright Eyes record. There's some sort of sample that intros, whether it's him, Connor talking, like in Wide Awake, or it's a noise sample, or it's an audio clip. In this case, I think, you know, if I had to say that the theme of the record is actually probably what I responded to. And I think this idea of like Cassadaga being a place that you could go, or a place that you could go to find cleansing, or that you can travel somewhere to find cleansing, I think is like what the sample's pointing at. And in a way, it kind of like strikes at the theme of the record. And I think there's this line from the sample. It's like Cassadaga might just be a premonition of a place you're going to visit. And I think that's kind of a through line of the record, and a through line that I like. Some of the pieces, like I totally agree with about Falling Flat, but the sample into the beginning acoustic guitar in Clairaudience, I think it still holds up really well, and the swelling kind of orchestral thing at the beginning, it's all really beautiful.
Corporate or colonial, the movement is unstoppable, like the body of a centerfold. It spreads to the counterculture copyright. Get your revolution at a lower price, or make believe and throw the fight. Play dead. It's exploding bags, aerosol cans, southbound buses, Peter Pan. They left it up to us again. I thought you knew the drill. It's kill or be killed.
Four Winds, also like that song. I think that's where we get into like the pretty serious like biblical references, and there's this like another through line of Babylon, which keeps on coming up, which I think is this idea of like America at the time being the empire that's ending, you know, which I think is also like a through line that's kind of like sort of held up in hindsight. And then toward the end, there's some very pretty songs, like Cleanse Song, Lime Tree. Those are beautiful songs. I think Lime Tree holds up with a lot of songs that he's ever written. So yeah, that's kind of where those are kind of my heavy hitters for the record, I think.
Both those two you mentioned are real. They're powerful songs and also like very vulnerable feeling. Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I was just going to agree that Lime Tree is really good. It's actually the one I singled out for unalloyed praise in that review I wrote all those years ago. And I think I wrote about it then in the context of it being an example of his emotional intelligence, which is the kind he's always had so much of, as opposed to this kind of like political intelligence or moral intelligence he was trying to explore on a lot of the record in a way that felt, or records leading up to that felt a little maybe presumptuous to me, because he wasn't quite that prophetic to be getting that moral with things. But yeah, Lime Tree was a really good song.
I keep floating down the river, but the ocean never comes. And since the operation, I heard your breathing just for one. Now everything's imaginary, especially what you love. You left another message, said it's done.
The one that, when I thought back on this record today, like I couldn't really remember songs. The one thing that sticks with me about this record was more of a feel or a vibe. It's kind of that numinous, mystical kind of feel that courses through it. One place you hear that is definitely on Clairaudient, that first song, which I think is definitely a pretty good one. And also on, what was the name of that other song? I'll have to look. Oh, the one near the end, which is probably my favorite song on the record, which is the, oh my God, I'm so blanking on the name. Dream.
Coat Check Dream Song?
Yeah.
Yes, Coat Check Dream Song. Thank you. That has that kind of really like sinuous, sidewindy feel. That's the only thing that stuck with me from this record after all these years, was that kind of that feel. And I was surprised at how little of it there actually was on the record when I went back to it today, and how that just made so much more of an impression on me than a lot of the kind of roots rocky stuff. That song in particular, Coat Check Dream Song, I think it's a really good song. It's not a good Old Bright Eyes song. It's not like he went back to Old Bright Eyes. It's a good song that is like something else.
Shrill as a choir of children, urgent like the first day of May. False and inflatable feeling tugs at my senses, big as the Macy's parade.
The version where he constantly does something different with each record is good, no matter how you spin it, right? Like if you just like, oh man, I'm wide awake, it's morning, this really hit. I think he's directly responding to I'm Wide Awake It's Morning by making songs that take a little while. They're not the way I feel about these songs, which is not a compliment, but is very much like contrasted against I'm Wide Awake It's Morning, is that this is a record full of 5-minute songs that feel to me like they're 6.5 minutes long.
Yes,
You know?
yes, that's it. That's even some of the really Make a Plan to Love Me is a really pretty song. But fuck, that song feels long, and it's not that long, but it just seems like it will never like get where it's going and never end.
When you're young, the world's a Ferris wheel. I know we will grow old, it's lovely still.
Make a plan to love me.
Make a plan to love me sometime soon. Life's too short to be a fool.
Yeah, really quick. There's something you said, Brian, about not knowing where to take the project, and I think that there's like actual lyrical references on the Middleman. It kind of like made me think about this idea of I keep my exits wide, never know when it's time to go. This could be interpreted as a, kind of like, is it time to leave this project? Is it time to do something new? The moving on theme, I think, kind of is self-referential in that way. I think it kind of applies to the project. And I think he's very conflicted about whether or not to move on.
So I keep my footlights shining bright, just like I keep my exits wide. 'cause I never know when it's time to go. It's too crowded now inside.
To No One Will Riot for Less, there's a line where he says, I'm leaving this place, there's nothing I'm planning to take. But then in I Must Belong Somewhere, he says, I wish you'd leave me here. Like I'm not leaving. So I think he's kind of feeling conflicted about whether or not to leave, where to go. So probably both in life and musically. So
Yeah.
I don't have the details, but I know that immediately, I mean, it's 4 more years until another Bright Eyes record happens, and there's multiple solo records and a Monsters of Folk record. And I mean, he kind of does leave it for a little bit after this.
Yeah, there's a sense of exhaustion to it that is really kind of beautiful when it works, but sometimes also just does feel a little bit like exhausted, a little bit out of ideas maybe. I think there's too much fiddling on the record, and I'm not anti-fiddling by any means, especially if it's a nice fiddle just slipped into the music, but it's like, okay, time for fiddling. And it's maybe a little bit of like, well, here's a verse I don't have to write if we just have a nice another passage of fiddling here. Like maybe the ideas were running thin. But I think, I mean, we have to remember this is like several years after the kind of new Dylan, is he the new Dylan wave had, or bubble had inflated and then maybe, burst or just kind of slowly deflated. That didn't really seem like to take off. And that's not his fault. I mean, that was always a really absurd thing because he's nothing like Dylan in so many ways, even though he may try to put on a Dylan move for his like protest songs sometimes. His songwriting is very, very different. I was actually fell down a little bit of a rabbit hole today. I was like, who was saying that Bright Eyes was the new Dylan? And what you find is a lot of articles saying people say that he is the new Dylan, but nobody actually saying that he's the new Dylan. I'm like, who was patient zero here? Who was the first person to say this? The earliest thing I could really find was in 2005, the Sasha Farrer Jones New Yorker article where he said, people are saying he's the new Dylan. It was right in the lead. And I was a little surprised about kind of how early that was and how that was entrenched. So already by 2005, by the album before this, that cycle is already like well underway. And granted, I'm thinking about it more as a critic than an artist now, but at the same time, if you're operating at a certain level and people are saying things like that about you, it's got to affect your psyche and it's got to affect your songwriting somehow. And I listen to something like Cassadaga and I'm like, is this still an attempt to follow through on that? Or is this an attempt to like kind of slither out the side door of that kind of oversized legend of Bright Eyes? And I kind of feel like maybe it was the latter.
yeah, I kind of agree. There is a point in the lyrics here on Clairaudience. I mean, there might be other places this happens too, but this song is obviously like anti-corporate, and there does appear to be a Dylan reference at the end of the song where he says, "Would you agree times have changed?" So I think that probably undergirds your point that it's kind of a stick in the eye of like, this is not who I am. He just had the most successful record release. The last Bright Eyes record was the most successful of their catalog, and now you're seeing all the Dylan comparisons, and I don't know. It's an interesting place to put a Dylan reference.
Did you know that he was? I don't know if he auditioned or if he was just considered or whatever, but he was like fully in the conversation to play that Oscar Isaac role in Inside Llewyn Davis.
No.
Yeah, that was.
I did not know that. That's wild.
The degree to which that was like really, really, really a thing, I'm not really sure. Maybe I'm doing the people were saying type thing right now. But there's some level of, I mean, I think it was like, I feel like it was him saying he's glad he didn't do it or something. But I mean, that isn't Inside Llewyn Davis is its own movie, but a bit of a Dylan story, right? Like,
yeah,
I don't know.
That's pretty wild.
Fascinating. That'd have been weird. That would have been really weird.
But Evan was talking earlier about Cassadaga and the themes of like spirituality and how he talks about it. I want to be sure I'm not confused about this. Cassadaga is a real place, right? Wasn't it like a real like spiritual retreat?
It's the psychic capital of the world's in Florida. And I think that the samples at the beginning of the record are basically like phone in psychics. I think they probably called a bunch of psychics and got a bunch of audio samples from like dial-up psychics. That'd be my guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, Cassadaga it's a reference to this town in Florida that's the psychic capital of the world.
they're also referencing like similar things happening in Arizona and these other places with these like kind of like energy vortex. Like,
Yeah, I think the idea being that like it's not the place in Florida, it's anywhere that's healing. Like anywhere. There's a line where I wrote down, Cleanse song where he says, "A place to get clean, maybe Los Angeles, somewhere no one's expecting."
Don't forget what you learned, all you give is returned. And if life seems absurd, what you need is some laughter and a season to sleep and a place to get clean. Maybe Los Angeles, somewhere no one's expecting. On a detox walk through a Glendale park, over sidewalk chalks on the road in red, start over. So I muffle my scream on an Oxnard beach full of fever dreams that scare you sober.
And then at the end of the record too, there's a line in Lime Tree where he's talking about walking into the forest. This idea like that there's no time better than now. So the feeling of being conflicted, like to just take a leap. And I think the last lines on the record are, "Walked into the woods, I felt lost and found with every step I took."
I took off my shoes and walked into the woods. I felt lost and found with every step I took.
So I think that's kind of like a wrap on the idea of Cassadaga being, a place you could go at any time and not just like one location.
Right. See, I thought it was an actual, like a one, like kind of spiritual retreat or cleansing kind of place that he went to, maybe to dry out or just to heal mentally in some way. I don't know. I wasn't super clear on that, but I mean, that's clearly, I guess, then where the whole like mystical vibe of the record comes in. It's actually a really weird record in that way. It's like so mystical on one extreme, and on the other extreme, it's just like this Countrypolitan record, or this like kind of honky tonky sounding record. Sometimes it's pretty strange hybrid when you really kind of dig down into it.
And there's like a conflict at the core of that. That's probably the conflict of Bright Eyes, and probably the reason why this is the last record for 4 years or something, where there is like a palpable conflict going on here between even the songs on the record and how they sound.
I like the point you make about Cassadaga is not a place in Florida, and this record is about that. This is a thing you can go to anywhere, anytime. It's something more it represents something more broad. Otherwise, if it was about some spiritual journey at this specific place in Florida, it fails to be a cohesive thing in that way. But if it's a thing about looking for some kind of spiritual clarity or something, you can find that all over. But sonically, you're right. Like, okay, you can find that all over, but then squarely in the middle of it is Classic Cars, a song about a older woman you dated.
That's right.
A song I love, but a song I personally love.
That's right.
But doesn't fit in that,
There's some messiness, like a big part of messiness in some of the through lines of the narrative that I'm kind of like trying to draw together as I was listening to this again. And I think the most compelling thing for me is like in Lime Tree, this idea of fruit rotting, and sometimes the fruit rots and it falls on the ground, and sometimes you pick it and it's ripe to eat. And so this idea of like, there's no better time than now to find a place to heal. I think it's kind of a beautiful concept. And I think the places where that's brought up, it turns up a lot in the finding meaning in a place, I think turns up in most of the songs. And even like this idea of like the brakeman, I could be anywhere. It just depends on what the brakeman decides, So I like that thread, and I think that's the thing that I enjoy the most about the record, and maybe the things that bother you, Brian, I think in hindsight also bother me. And there's a lot of chaos that kind of like doesn't fit in that theme very cleanly. But I think that makes sense from the perspective of a band that's kind of like breaking apart. that doesn't have like a unified direction anymore.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, like I said, I hadn't listened to this record in a very long time, and I've listened to it, 2 or 3 times this week leading up to this. And what I found is that, it's not like the scales fell from my eyes and I'm like, this is an incredible Bright Eyes album, but I found myself liking it a bit more each time I listened to it and finding, more things to like about it. I mean, just today, Classic Cars, which you mentioned, kind of jumped out at me as just like a nice, unobjectionable song that I would have kind of overlooked in my 20s probably, that, sounds better to me now.
She was a real royal lady, true patron of the arts. Said the best country singers die in the back of classic cars. So if I ever got too hungry for a suitcase or guitar, to think of him all alone in the dark. So I laid some
same with Flynn's song, probably, which has a little to me, it sounds a little bit like Paul Simon turning into Jimmy Buffett, like Before Our Ears, which is pretty freakish, but kind of cool.
That's why that right there is why you've written 500 Pitchfork reviews.
Yeah, my mind being broken in that particular way is why I'm still eking out a Pitchfork review a month after almost 20 years or whatever it's been now. So yeah, I keep finding moments on this record where I'm like, oh, that's cool, or that's a nice little Bright Eyes moment. I still find little moments to appreciate in Bright Eyes, and I'm finding a lot more of them on this album than I did back then. Although I do also continually encounter things like, why does he have a British accent on Soul Singer in a session band? Why is he singing with a British accent on the chorus? Why are there so many whores on this record? I mean, I know the whore of Babylon is like that he's doing this whole religious thing, but I'm like, I think I've heard you say whore enough times on this record by the second or third song, Connor. Let's move on with that.
So that's a reference from Revelations.
Oh yes, I know.
Where I think he's pointing to America there, but yeah, I kind of agree on all that stuff.
I got the reference. I just thought he liked saying whore a little bit too much.
Yeah, it's probably true. It's probably true.
And
I think that Salutations record is really good.
Yeah. Well, he had Rumination.
Cool
Ruminations is the one with just the piano, and then Salutations is like fleshed out versions of those songs.
I like the stripped down one. Yeah, whichever that one was.
I saw that tour by pitching to write an article for the Alt Weekly in Sacramento, getting to go to it based on that, and then that Alt Weekly saying, "No, we're cool. We don't need an article about that." And so, don't know if I should be putting that out there, but I just went to that show and saw a young Phoebe Bridgers at that show. It's interesting.
Oh, cool.
So, speaking of live shows, I want to go to that. Cassadaga was actually, I explained my arrival at Bright Eyes. I had never seen them live until that time, and I saw 2 shows, and this was kind of like it makes sense, right? Like you hear this record, they were all dressed in white suits with a big band and all the fiddle and all the like strings. And it was a grandiose thing. And Jim James from My Morning Jacket was opening, and Gillian Welch was opening. It was a pretty big thing. But I remember seeing these and being so excited. Like my friend and I was just like, I haven't seen this. Like it's been this slow build of really loving this person's music. Seeing the show, really, really liking the show, but just being so in the moment cognizant that I just missed when I needed to see this musician, because it was, I was getting songs from Lifted and Fevers and Mirrors and I'm Wide Awake It's Morning, and it was so good, but just remember knowing that it was like, I'm finding what I really, really want here in 1/3 of the set, or half probably.
Justin, I got really into the Chapel Hill music scene right after Archers of Loaf and Polvo broke up, so I'm very familiar with that. I just missed the best party in the world feeling talking about.
Yeah. And so I saw that show, and then I went actually and visited a friend in LA, and maybe I bought these things at the same time. I don't really know, but I saw that tour twice, or I saw some post Cassadaga I saw him twice, and I watched in LA. My 2 memories of that one are getting like a song, some song from Lifted or something starts playing, and I was kind of standing back watching from afar, just watching the set, and just deciding like, I'm going up there. Like I want to go up there like that. This is the thing you can have at a concert. Like, yeah, I grew up on punk music and stuff too. And just at any given moment, if you decide like, I don't want to be back here, I'm going to go get right up in there, you can just do it. But let me tell you, like, we could talk about like big rough dudes at punk shows. You still kind of can weasel on through. It's just part of what's happening. Bright Eyes fans, there was no fucking way. I went and I just got so by like a handful of people younger than me, guys and girls, that just was like, absolutely not. Like, this is staked out. We have the space. You're not going there, and just being like, okay. And then, but what was also is where I was standing back, I was like 5 feet away from Kirsten Dunst. That was my other memory from that. I watched that show next to Kirsten Dunst. That was cool.
Brian, what was your favorite live experience with this band?
I think I've seen them at least twice. The first one is the one I remember because it was just Connor solo. It was at a small club, and it was like sometime, I think it was after Fevers, but before Lifted. So there was a lot of Fever stuff in it. Super stripped down, sweaty, unhealthy feeling. I loved it. Sometime after that, I saw them with the whole big band. I don't remember if it was like Lifted or Wide Awake, probably a couple of times, probably at the Cat's Cradle in Chapel Hill, Carborough. And those shows I just don't remember at all. They were just some of the many shows I saw around that time. I think it was also just that era of indie music, like that mid 2000s era, when all the bands had to have like 20 people on stage, and they were playing crash cymbals and kazoos. And like there was just like maybe wearing marching band like busby like helmets, or who knows what the fuck all they were doing. They had names like I'm from Barcelona and Architecture in Helsinki, just like wild shit going on. And I think Bright Eyes was kind of infected with that too. That kind of like big band kitchen sink. You know, he'd been playing with Tilly on the Wall. Like, we tap dance on a box, and like just like crazy shit going on. And it was a little bit more of like a big Muppet production, or it was like the scene at the end of Star Wars when all the Muppets dance or something, but it was a Bright Eyes show. It's a big cantina scene.
Who's Patient Zero for that? Who started that? It's like Arcade Fire or something, or who's?
I don't know. Polyphonic Spree couldn't have helped.
Yeah.
The band as cult / daycare. That was a real weird thing for a while. Like we all just broke out of preschool and formed a cult, and now we're a band.
Nice. Have you seen them live, Evan?
Yeah, so I saw them I saw them on the first time I saw them was Wide Awake, and I've seen a few. Had the same exact experience live because I missed the early stuff, and I had the same exact experience as you, Brian. Just like too many people on stage, I couldn't hear what was going on. Like I couldn't relate to anything. It was so much cacophony. I saw them at Freeborn, I think in 2005, in Davis.
Oh yeah.
And the best performance I think I've seen of Connor was like an afternoon show, so that was probably helpful. And that was, I think, Mystic Valley.
So love me now. Hell is coming. You kiss my mouth.
Looking ahead, like what's so funny is I have listened to People's Key, but not like extensively. And then the new one, I was kind of in the process of thinking I would do this season of this show, and so I've kind of deliberately not. I've heard it for sure, but I've kind of deliberately not gone to it because I like kind of traveling in time, album by album, and I'll do that when I'm there. But what's so fascinating though is like, I don't know if I'm going to like those more or less or equally to this one, but I know that those ones are not saddled with the baggage I put on this one, what this one had to like fulfill because of my expectations going into it. They're just purely music I get to listen to, you know, which was I did the first season of this show was about Jackson Browne. And Jackson Browne has 5 like amazing first albums that it's really a similar arc, like that really like go inward and look at the heart, and anything beyond that that's external is kind of tastefully there. Whereas then he gets into the 80s and it's like he's singing clumsily about politics and stuff too, you know. Maybe curious because he goes 4 years between this one and People's Key, and then like 9 years between that one and the more recent one. So extrapolate that out, it's going to be like a Bright Eyes record. The next one will be in like 15 years probably.
I'm really interested to hear how you're going to handle those more contemporary records that have less baggage and inhabit a very different musical landscape than some of the kind of early ones that you've talked about. Really curious to see how you'll handle those and who you find that has strong enough feelings about them to like go in deep on them. Like, are you going to find someone who's like a huge People's Key fan, or like
I'm not sure. Yeah, what is good about the way I handled it on the Jackson Browne one worked out well is I shifted fully into I'm not telling stories about going to buy the record with my ex-girlfriend on the day. It's just I'm a journalist asking questions. Teach me about it. Like that's
Right.
You're right, but like I'm not sure exactly. I might. Yeah, no, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see when I go there. It's really fun to just take them one by one, though.
Are you doing the Connor Oberst albums too? Ruminations and the other one we talked about?
You need to like trigger warning me before asking me that. I've like there's so many side projects and so many EPs and everything that I think I'll probably do one catch-all thing about all of the solo and side project things or something. Or I think this is actually, I don't think this is even hyperbole. I think there are more Bright Eyes songs not on official albums than there are on albums. There are so many scattered songs and everything. And then that doesn't even count solo records and other ones. Like it's the sheer volume of songs is crazy over that period of time.
Something kind of interesting, like a thread here, is just like how other people impact a songwriter.
Yeah.
There's 3 core members of Bright Eyes. So what is the place where the people in the band are influencing the writing or the sound as opposed to other side projects? Or
that's a good point, because the way I know a Saddle Creek record is you hear Mike Mogis pedal steel on it, and that's like the Saddle Creel, like Saddle Creek, like stamp and wax is that Mogis pedal steel. So there's definitely a lot of group influence going on in there.
Leave the bright blue door on the whitewashed wall. Leave the death ledger under City Hall. Leave the joyful air in that rubber ball today. Just leave the lilac print on the...
I wrote something really dumb once. I got yelled at. I don't remember if it was in Pitchfork or a zine or Alt Weekly or what, about Simon Joyner had come out with a record, and I wrote about how Simon Joyner was just like this watered down Bright Eyes ripoff. When of course I think Simon Joyner was actually a local guy who Bright Eyes himself was like quite inspired by. And I think I got some shade from people who like lived in the area and knew, but that's just kind of a symptom of like the early internet days. Still didn't really understand the difference between like what was real and what wasn't, and how it lined up with the real world and how that was changing all the time. But yeah, that's probably one of the stupidest Bright Eyes related things I ever wrote, was saying that he ripped off this singer who influenced him, or that, the singer ripped off him rather.
I guarantee I've said stupider things, so
But did you write them down for everybody to see?
I don't know. Probably nobody would read them anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I've talked to a lot of writers for the show and everything, and so like you're talking about like, oh, anything I wrote 6 months prior to now, I might look back with like some feeling of, can't remember the word you used, like
repudiation.
Repudiation.
Yeah.
I think it's so interesting to talk about and think about that kind of thing as it relates to Bright Eyes and Connor Oberst, a person who started documenting things at 14, 15, 16 years old. And it's just there. It's just there. Like, and it's kind of, you see it that way, it's like you find the moments that are so bright and promising on that very first collection and letting off the happiness. And then you find the parts like, man, that sounds like an immature kid just trying to figure out but that's like what that is, and then you hit, it's really wild how common it is. Like, then you have this prime moment of like, wow, it's all pure and real and you mature enough. And then it gets to this part where you round a corner and you're at Cassadaga, and it's like, you see the brilliance there, but then you also, that pure early part is lost, is kind of almost all the way gone now. I don't know.
He's had a really long arc of scrutiny, and I kind of feel for him in that a bit, just like you said, he's been documented since his like preteen years, and people have really intense feelings about it. And he's been dealing with that since like, obviously he's not like a pop star, but when you're a teenager and you're big on your local scene, even that's a big thing to like carry. And he's been under that scrutiny for so long. And I definitely like empathize with the ways that has probably been difficult for him.
Totally. Does it feel like there's anything you guys want to talk about that I haven't asked about to make sure we get to as we wind ourselves down?
Let's see. We didn't talk about the spectral decoder on the album, which was kind of a Fevers and Mirrors throwback, and that it was something fancy about the physical package. But I don't think I don't know. Did y'all ever use the spectral decoder? Did it do anything? You have it right there. Beautiful.
It's the only physical Bright Eyes thing that I own. CD, record, any of it.
So what does it say when you put the spectral decoder on it?
Rocks beneath the water under some pyramids. A lot of stuff that seems like it might be Latin.
Mm.
I was kind of like looking into this a bit. I didn't write down all the stuff that it says on the cover, but there seems to be a lot of references to the lyrics, reference to I think a person, maybe somebody who died that played on a Bright Eyes record previously. Seems to be quite a few little messages there. Swollen
saints bathing in a backward river under a sliver of a moon. I think the combination of like that's unique, you know, that's going the extra step, like Fevers and Mirrors did, like it affected me taking the plastic off this thing, being like, what is this? What? And I'd only heard Four Winds at that point, probably. And wherever we land on Four Winds, it feels big and grandiose in its way. It's literally like listing off world religions and stuff like that. And so I think it all is just inviting you to think like, oh my God, this thing is going to be, it goes so big and so orchestral and so this and that. I remember being like a week or two in my car of just keep listening, Justin. This baby's going to really, really find its place for you. And instead what happened is like, I arrived at like these 5 songs I absolutely love, but I have a desire to skip to them every time. And that you just got to listen to that at a certain point. That means that's just where I am, you know?
There's maybe an interesting and telling contrast in that when I look at the packaging gimmick of Cassadaga, I see a bunch of gibberish that I don't really know if I want to take the time to decode. And when I look at Fevers and Mirrors, I see myself. What else could I see in that mirror? Yeah. And that's kind of the difference of those albums to me personally. Yeah. Although this is all a very, very personal take that I'm offering here. So I guess the only other thing I would add about personal Bright Eyes connections is that we had a band here in Chapel Hill called Sorry About Dresden that his brother, Matt Oberst, was a songwriter and guitarist. And Matt unfortunately passed away sometime, maybe it was 10 years ago or something now. But I talked about getting into music here right after Archers and Polvo had broken up. And Sorry About Dresden was like one of my favorite local bands, partly because they were awesome and they sounded kind of like Archers, and partly because one of them was Bright Eyes' brother. I think he was at Duke either as a student or a teacher is why he was here. And that just gave them this extra like kind of mystique and cool to me. And I was also still in that phase of like becoming aware of like Midwestern emo, different pockets of music and how they interacted across the country, and understanding like, oh, there's this group of like people in Omaha, and now they're having this relation with these people in Chapel Hill, and this conduit that has been established, and like other Omaha people are coming, or then there was a Florida wave years later, so it's all tied in with me starting to understand kind of the geography of indie music, at least as it existed, before the internet blew it away a few years later.
Well, Evan, where can people find you as a person or music or anything along those lines?
I think the main thing I'm doing right now is called Lonesome Ana. It's findable on all socials at Lonesome Ana. It's ANA.
Lonesome Ana put out a record this past year that's great, and Evan plays in Lonesome Ana and made some great records with the band Sun Valley Gun Club prior to that as well. Brian, where can people find you?
I look forward to checking that out, Evan. It's been great to talk to you. I am still incredibly eking out a Pitchfork review a month or so. I'm also still writing for Indie Week, which is the alt weekly here in Durham, where I worked as the arts and culture editor for some years until I joined the great quittening of 2020 and went freelance again. So you can find my writings in those places and other places that I freelance out to, although I'm doing a lot of editing books these days that has been biting into my freelance time. I am on Twitter for the time being, although I never tweet. And as we all know, it's going to go dark any day now. Maybe you can find me on Mastodon. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen yet. I do have a website. It's waxwroth.com. That's WAXWROTH. I'm not very good at promotion, as you can tell by that ridiculous website name. You have to spell carefully for anybody. Nevertheless, waxwroth.com. It's a phrase I think I took from like an old like Donald Barthelme story or something, like an archaic phrase meaning to grow enraged, to wax wroth, to wax with wrath. And that just became a brand of mine many years ago, and I just keep using it even though it makes no sense. So that's where I can be found.
I respect it.
And thank you, Justin. I've really enjoyed this podcast so far, and it was a lot of fun to be on it and to listen to Bright Eyes for the first time in quite a while. Like I told you, I don't listen to it much, but I still break it out and sing it with my guitar because the songs are just like that deep in me, where I just get a taste for them. Sometimes I need to taste them, even though I don't really listen to them. So this was really fun to go back and listen to a bunch of Bright Eyes and talk about it with you guys.
Yeah. Did you say the day that I emailed you'd played June on the West Coast earlier that day?
I was having a Bright Eyes session that day. I played June on the West Coast. I probably played a new arrangement, which is one of my favorite super dark, depressive ones to play. Probably played some Fevers and Mirrors stuff. So yeah, absolutely. It was funny. I was thinking about Bright Eyes, and then I got this email, and it was like, well, kismet.
Love that.
Just a second. Thank you so much, Justin, for having me here and involving me. And it was nice to meet you, Brian. Really good to talk to you. Yeah.
So I haven't done like a group thing like this very much. And then also I think it kind of accidentally, like, I think this record, there's like a complicated kind of nuance to this record, not only just looking at the record, but the way the wide variety of ways people feel about it. And I think having the three of us on all to talk about this kind of approximated that. It feels appropriate. Accidental, but
yes.
She just can't